this past month of November was all about praise. And it's had me thinking a lot about the things that I was so often praised for as a child, mostly being smart, or at least seeming like it. My cousin was the tough kid. He was sporty, he's all outdoorsy, lives in a cabin in the woods now and has a farm. But me, I was more interested in music and poetry, video games, and asking absolutely insufferable questions no 12-year-old has any business asking if you ask my aunts and uncles, unless you're a good Unitarian Universalist. Why is the sky blue? What is the sun? Why does the Bible say 7 days when the science book says 14.5 billion years? That's not the same. If everything else about us disappears when we die, then why don't our bones? The important questions. I can imagine the tired brow of my father lightly furrowing as he would drive me back from a visit from Knoxville back into Kingston in my mother's home. Occasionally I might get, good question. Good question. Sometimes I would get an honest answer or just some bombardment of information that I never anticipated, such as when I asked my dad about nuclear energy. I know a lot of us know a lot more about that than I do. Often either he or my mom would just shrug, tired of my insufferable pestering and rapid-fire questions, and just say, because that's how God made it. And that's just the way it is. Unsatisfying, ultimately, but as we all inevitably learn in the process of growing up, sometimes you don't get easy answers. Sometimes we have to do a little digging of our own. This got even worse as I became a teenager. I found that really leaning into that smart kid aesthetic gave me props, and I started carrying a dictionary or some similar unwieldy tome. Really helped me play up that role that I've been praised for. And this essentially became like my major identity. Smart kid who plays the tiny guitar, play mandolin. Granted, I was not a particularly good student. I am better now. Which my family blames on me being bored, but in truth had more to do with my fascination with walking outside and playing video games than it really ever had to do with me being bored in class. But I wanted to seem smart, and so I did. I genuinely enjoyed learning as I would pick up new words, and building a broad vocabulary was one of these ways I received praise from my peers and my teachers and my family. This stint into reading not just books, but dictionaries and thesauruses and the like opened up this real fascination with words. Why do we use certain words and not others? Where do words come from? I was particularly interested in the esoteric-sounding words used in church life. If I wasn't asking either my folks or a church elder some obtuse question like, why is it called a narthex? I was spouting out some strange fact. The word hymnal comes from the Greek humenos, which is the song of praise for a god or a hero. This is just who I was as a child. And ultimately, I've been working on mellowing out in my 30s. Letting go of the rapid-fire questions and needing to be seen as smart or anything really, and loosen some of those shackles. And see the ways that we've been praised as maybe kind of putting us into a little box that's maybe a little too small for us. But I've always carried this fascination with language and words and all the way we convey meaning to one another. And as we are moving into this month of signs and miracles, I thought it might be prudent to actually break open the word miracle to see what we actually mean. My inquisitive inner child leapt at the chance to explore these roots, to take up the lens of etymology and imagine the evolution of this word we use, miracle. It gets thrown around so often, typically without a whole lot of intention behind it. The Merriam-Webster dictionaries define a miracle typically in a few ways: some extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs, or an extremely outstanding or unusual event, thing, or accomplishment, a word ultimately used to refer to religious experiences of some kind or some welcome, strange happening. The beginning of December is frequently observed as the beginning of Advent in the Christian calendar, a time set aside to anticipate the miraculous birth of a Savior. And there's this anticipatory element to miracles when we look at them this way. They are an expectation of the religiously inspired life for some, and yet for many of us, this inflation with miracles as some massive grandeur that's necessarily just on the way, that must be anticipated, that must be believed in at face value, it really doesn't jive with us. It doesn't appeal to us, many of us, some of us. And so we often see the word miracle being used as some event where we have a welcome outcome despite murky expectations, and that is how we often use the word. Both within and without religious communities, this word has a variety of meanings and interpretations. And within our own religious communities, y'all, both of these meanings might find life, might take root, might lower the spirit, might speak to us as we speak using this word, miracles. Now, maybe you've had some experiences in your life that would line up with one of these definitions, or maybe even both. I know that I certainly have. Now, a few years ago, around this time of year, around Thanksgiving, I was saddled with some pretty heavy feelings about my place and my family. I had spent more than a decade telling myself these stories about how I would be disowned and unloved when I was finally able to come out to my family. While my mother had been loving and accepting, I hadn't really been around the rest of my folks in a while, and I was naturally just really nervous and anxious, and I had been telling myself all these stories. I had so much anticipation, just something bad. And sure enough, there were folks in my family who had very strong negative feelings about me and let me know it in a number of ways, and that is a thing. But in that moment, where love felt scarce, like I was walking into a desert, 2 of my cousins, 3 of my aunts, my own mother stood up and defended me. I had a seat at that table when I didn't think I would have a seat at that table. Loving our family members shouldn't have to be contextualized as miraculous, but to me in that moment, it's nothing short of a miracle. Where I was anticipating malice, expecting to be cast aside, I found some righteous love. Where I had expected unyielding hardness, I found a sweetness and a softness and an ease I could not have expected. And we've all likely had little moments of grace in our lives like these little miracles, if we trace back our lives and think and look for them, because they're everywhere. There is something beautiful inside this word miracle, a whole world of treasures waiting to be unveiled. Like all the words, it has a history. All words have a history, a story behind them. We take up the lens of etymology and enter into this linguistic past on a sort of archaeological pursuit of meaning. Here, words might be like artifacts. You can feel them in your mind. Hold them in your mouth. Imagine saying these words every day, and even if we lack all the signifiers and all the symbols, we may come away with something so old it may as well be new, of interpretations washed away, waiting to be re-explored and maybe reintegrated into the nebulous, shifting nature of language. And as we take up this word miracle, setting aside popular interpretations and definitions, the closest etymological root is in the Latin miraculum. I'm not fluent in Latin, so pardon my pronunciations. Meaning essentially to wonder at, to be startled by, to be amazed at, in the earlier Latin miras, meaning again to wonder at. Wonder, this idea of wonder, puzzlement, amazement, wonder, miras. This Latin root has evolved into a number of the Romance languages. In Portuguese, the word mirar means to aim, while out of general use, the French mirar means to stare, or in Spanish, mirar, which may mean to see or to contemplate something seriously, to be transfixed by something, to witness something beyond, or maybe even bigger than oneself. The sentiment has evolved like a tree grows branches, a common trunk, or a branch upon which new branches grow. And with language, they're each bearing their own sort of linguistic fruit. They have their own character and flavor and texture. Peeling back another layer in time, we can see that even this word, the Latin miras, has a root in the Proto-Italic language, which predates all Romance languages. This word smira, which means to smile. to be glad, smira. A fascinating word because it is also proposed as a root for the word smile that we use today. I just wanted to take a second and reflect on this relationship with the word miracle and the word smiles, because they often seem very separate, but etymologically speaking, they're siblings. What was a time you smiled recently? What was a time where you were smiling? Consider that relationship, because every time we use that word smile, we are carrying over a piece of the past, a word that pointed at once to the feelings of gladness, the act of smiling, and to that which is beyond ourselves that brings us joy. It was also a word for miracles, smira, to smile, this ancient word, largely lost to time unless you spend a lot of time on the internet like I do. The etymological sibling to our own word miracle. Personally, I feel like this is a beautiful, profound connection to make. And while it's true that there isn't really written evidence for the Proto-Italic or the Proto-Indo-European languages that predate it, linguists have spent a great deal of time and spilt a great deal of ink comparing and contrasting the continental languages of Europe and the surrounding regions to help us peer into the past to reveal these words, these artifacts charged with cultural conditions, and those things that were important to our ancestors who lived back then. And we are their descendants, exploring back through time the ways our language shift and grow. Our word miracle still holds some glimmer of its ancient predecessor in it, the sense of wonderment, some unexpected happening that brings us to smile. As I was preparing this sermon, I found myself imagining words less like a series of definitive meanings, like a list, and more like a constellation of varied interpretations. A constellation like a set of stars, some faint, some dim, but each a constituent part of this bigger picture we're tracing in the sky. Sometimes they might share stars with other constellations with some crossover. Also like a constellation, our words are not two-dimensional drawings on a flat surface, but rather are changing positions and place over time in 3 dimensions, moving and shifting. Maybe some stars finally burn out, their light lost to the eye and their meaning lost to time. Some are brighter, more in use, more known, others more obscure, these vague interpretations or ancient roots almost forgotten, words like mira and smira, to wonder, to smile. There is no real center. There is no real right way, maybe better or worse, more or less intelligible, what's useful when we're communicating. But part of being a good Unitarian Universalist to me is to understand that I don't have all the answers, and that I share in the process not as the person with the right fix or the final solution or the right word, but as someone in relationship with other meaning makers, in collaboration, accomplices with one another, at once apart from and a part of something bigger than myself, this bigger social imagination. We may find ourselves impacted by a word like miracle in a number of different ways based off our own sort of context and how we use theological symbols, because all words are also symbols. Maybe that is some divine intervention. Maybe that's something we've actually experienced, or maybe it's just finding love when you didn't expect it. Both of these sentiments find gravity and make sense within this word miracle, and who knows how this word, and indeed all the words we yet use, will change in the future. There is one thing I have learned flipping around and researching the ultimate origins of words as best I can. It's that meaning is neither objective nor is it relative. It's relational. It's collectively changing in real time, right now, subtly, slowly, but surely nonetheless. I don't know how many of us hang out with youth and young adults, but particularly youth, so many new words that I don't know what they mean, that are entering into our vernacular. I learned the word yeet means to throw something. So just something, I know if your kids or grandkids say this, but this is how language evolves truly. It might seem absurd, but this is the garden blooming. Meaning is constructed and new words evolve as we use them in relationship with one another, in conversation with one another. Words like smira evolved into words like mirar, smile, and miracle in conversation in real time. Not slowly. I mean, not quickly, slowly. But even now, and especially now with the rise of social media and the internet more generally, our collective imagination, composed of all its innumerable individual parts, is shifting, it's growing, it's becoming something new, being remade. And the collective forge of our social imagination, whether we intend to or not, whether we speak English, Spanish, Arabic, German, whatever language we speak, whether we speak with our hands, the sign language, or convey meaning by pointing at a chart with letters, whether it's with our body language or our general disposition as human beings, we are constantly churning engines of meaning, connecting signs and symbols, signifying something beyond the word. We've been doing this for a very long time, a very, very, very long time, and we will be doing it long into the future. The more I consider this power of language, the more I feel like I'm staring into the unknowable mists of time where our first ancestors were developing a code of grunts and gestures which eventually evolved in some manner or another to all the methods of communication used today. I feel wrapped up in a big miracle, like all of creation is smiling inside of me. Because I'm in this. We're in this. This is real. We are all collaborators, willing or otherwise, in this great experiment of meaning-making. We do ourselves few favors by clinging tightly, thoughtlessly, to any one way, to any one interpretation, by appealing to authority for a meaning or digging our feet in the mud rather than resting on easy authority, expecting that things will be what they will be and words will just mean what they mean. What if we leaned into a more active role, or at least a more mindful role? What if we acknowledged ourselves for who we are? By mindfully entering into conversation and considering the impact of our words on the emotional and intellectual lives of our neighbors, might we come to see ourselves as the collaborative meaning makers we have always been. Before we were born and long after we are gone, this fire, this passion to name the world, to give voice to our feelings, to find creative ways to express ourselves, to show our convictions, to spread ideas, and to love one another. To love one another. This is a great part of the miracle of language and the process by which we come to make this world meaningful, and it is miraculous. As we live into this faith, which calls on us at once to witness to the inherent worth and dignity of our fellow persons and to uphold justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, it might do to be mindful of this great responsibility we all carry as we do the actual work that is building relationships with one another. The words we use matter beyond their typical authoritative definitions. Different communities, different people respond to different words in different ways. As my mama likes to tell me, it takes all kinds. For example, I've been really lately trying to practice mindfulness in how I use a particular word that people in the LGBTQ community in my generation often use to refer to ourselves. Sometimes we use the word queer in a self-referential, non-aggressive way, sort of like reclaiming, taking the sting out of a word, and that's all well and good. But this word also has a lot of sting and bite in it for some of the elders in our community. Part of being in right relationship is witnessing to this real pain, is really witnessing to the messy complexity that we all carry. Mindfulness, kindness, even as we're working to disempower words and to change culture and to be that change with our words, we should still be mindful of our context and practice kindness. Because taking care and choosing our words, even as we bear witness to act as instruments of the shifting nature of words and meaning, sometimes we might feel like we can't keep up. But this is one way we may make miracles come alive, is by being engaged, by being reflexive with one another, to meet each other's needs as best we can, by witnessing the full, rich, wondrous complexity that all people bring, by letting people be heard, by witnessing to each other's wounds and honoring them and loving each other in and through our various pains, by recognizing that we all have different needs, and that while we might share many interpretations, we may not share all of them, and that is more than okay. This is not a call to being anxious about our language, or to beat ourselves up when we use the wrong word for this occasion or that occasion. Rather, it is a call to mindfulness, which is quite a different thing than being hyper-anxious about saying the wrong thing, or feeling like we have to toe some party line of language lest we set in some motion, some horrible catastrophe of language and some social faux pas. Mindfulness is none of that. It is staying at the table, even when we slip up, and coming back over and over and over again, hearing the words come out of our mouth, really listening to ourselves, picking up patterns, and then changing them. God knows I've had to do this, not just as a minister, as a person, as a product of my time. I grew up in Rome County, and we all had the word gay in our mouth in some pejorative manner or another. Just an add-on to just about anything. I don't do this anymore. I'm not necessarily proud of it. It's just a thing I managed to stop doing, because once I knew better, once I recognized the power language has, that by using this word in this way all the time, I am maligning a whole group of people whom I love. I just would catch myself and throw it away. We are all growing and changing. Our language is growing and changing, and we should grow and change alongside of it. You know, a good gardener doesn't dig tirelessly into the earth, though, picking at leaves and stems without end to make the garden grow. No, she sows the seeds, waters the earth, steps back, and returns for maintenance as needed. I'm not saying gardening is easy. Like all work, it requires patience. And all work that requires patience is improved by a steady, non-anxious heart. Meditation helps, listening helps. We may feel called to overperform for the sake of a better world or a better life, but I'm here to tell you that overperforming is overrated, and that you are not alone in your hurt, in your heartache, and in your confusion, because we're all tending this garden together. The garden of language, the gardens of culture, and the garden of this beautiful, thriving community. And it is indeed miraculous. I believe there's something spiritual to paying heed to not only the way our words are received by our neighbors, but also an understanding that the way we use the miracle of our language and community will most certainly ripple out into the world to ultimately affect how we as a species will come to express ourselves in the years and decades and centuries to come. Our human capacity for language to both apply and shape meaning is a miracle in and of itself, our birthright and our responsibility. Our first principle as Unitarian Universalists proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of all people, and my friends, in my mind, that can be boiled down quite simply: you are important. You matter. We all matter. And what we do and what we say today and for the rest of our days may echo far beyond the passing moments of the now. We are, each of us, a miracle, a wonder, a smile in the eyes of the cosmos. May we be a people who can witness to the miracles that have been, all the ways we as a species have evolved, and the ways we continue to evolve both as creatures of nature and creatures of culture. May we be a people who can see the miracles in the mundane, for whom smiling might be wonder, to whom miracles are everywhere. Let us remember and be glad for the kaleidoscopic evolution of language and for the constellated nature of not just the words we use, but our own lives. For we too are so full of stories, so full of interpretations, and so closely related to one another. Despite the cold and the days growing darker, it's beautiful today, we may yet find reason to carry a heart full of praise, with eyes full of miracles, a smile on our souls, for all that we are, and all that there is worth knowing, for no matter where we come from, and no matter where we are going, meaning is always shifting, and there is always something growing, wondrous, miraculous, and smiling. Amen.
I invite you to rise and body our spirit for our closing hymn. It's number 1064, and your teal hymnal, We Vote Home.
May we be fools for love and pilgrims for justice, and until we meet again, may we go in beloved community.
I think I have a
Nobody cares.
They do care, they just don't have those questions.
It's like it's hard to ask questions when you don't know what.
One of them is about making everybody learn neutral language. I read that part. I read the more thing.
That's very, I don't know if you can condescend to me. Specifically, non-inclusive is almost the others are, this one is mostly telecommuting to board meetings because if we're trying,
Oh, you do? My goodness. Yeah, I've read both. I've read that song. Yeah, it is.
another is to try to have more experience.
That's not part of the plan. I know, but I'm joking. But that he's.
Trying to make sure there's more experience. I guess they
I saw her.
yeah, none of them were. None of them was bad practice.
Well, he was probably just. It wasn't like
I don't care. I'm a strong, strong opinion either way. Okay?
Great job. And if you ever want to hear it, really good version.
Yes, of course. Yes, yes. And you know, everybody has their own meaning about what that means. So.
And the story of, when you look at the book and you read the Bible doesn't have a lot of words or hints about a miracle, and I sure don't want to be cross-eyed. No. Yeah, so
I mean, you could just say something.
I'd rather not have. It made me uncomfortable.
Did you make that beautiful card?
Yes.
Talented people. Don't
No,
you just hate it?
no, I
Talented-
copy.
Thank you. Can I give you a hug?
Oh, definitely. I think
I wondered if it was something.
I really appreciate that. I thought it was great. Did it work?